My son unlocked my front door with a smile on his face. I heard his voice before I saw him. Well, Dad, we're home. His suitcase rolled across the hardwood floor. My daughter-in-law laughed behind him. I hope the house doesn't smell too bad after 2 months. Then he stepped into the living room, and he froze. His smile disappeared so quickly, it almost looked painful. 3 people slowly stood up from my dining table: a county detective, an adult protective services investigator, and my attorney. No one spoke for several long seconds. The detective finally broke the silence. Ryan Collins? My son's lips trembled. Yes. We've been waiting for you. Melissa looked from one face to another. What? What's going on? The detective didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward me. I was sitting in my favorite recliner. Alive. Very much alive. My son stared at me as though he'd seen a ghost. His face lost every bit of color. Dad, that single word came out as little more than a whisper. He took one uncertain step toward me before stopping again. He couldn't finish the sentence. He simply stood there, completely frozen. I looked him in the eyes. For 58 days, I'd wondered if I would ever see those eyes again. For 58 days, I'd wondered whether the last face I would ever remember would be my own son's. Now at last, he was the one who couldn't look away. My name is Harold Collins. I'm 71 years old, a retired high school principal from a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. For nearly 40 years, I believed that if you treated people with kindness and respect, most would eventually return that kindness when you needed it. I believed that family meant something. I believed my son loved me. Until 58 days changed everything. People in our neighborhood always describe Ryan as a devoted son. He visits every weekend. He takes care of your groceries. You're lucky. I used to smile and agree. I know, I'd tell them. I couldn't ask for a better son. Looking back now, I realize something important. Kind people often mistake control for care. Ryan wasn't becoming more helpful. He was becoming more involved in every corner of my life. At first, it seemed thoughtful. Dad, let me handle your online banking. Dad, you're forgetting passwords. Dad, let me keep a spare key. Dad, I'll organize your prescriptions. Each suggestion sounded reasonable. I was getting older. My wife, Eleanor, had passed away 6 years earlier after a long battle with ovarian cancer. Managing a house alone wasn't always easy anymore. I had congestive heart failure, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure. Every morning began with a line of pill bottles across the kitchen counter. Without them, my body reminded me very quickly that I wasn't young anymore. Ryan always seemed concerned, or at least that's what I thought. He started paying my utility bills online. He picked up prescriptions. He even convinced me to let him become an authorized signer on one of my checking accounts. It's only for emergencies, Dad. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He's my only child. I raised him after his mother and I struggled through years of financial hardship. I coached his Little League team. I helped him with algebra every night. When he totaled his first car in college, I quietly took money from my retirement account so he could finish school. When he and Melissa wanted a larger house after their second promotion, I loaned them $60,000 without asking for interest. I never kept score. Parents aren't supposed to. Several neighbors joked that Ryan had hit the jackpot with me. I laughed every time. He'd do the same for me. At least that's what I believed. About 3 months before everything happened, Ryan began visiting more often. Twice a week, then every other day. He asked questions that seemed harmless. When's your next doctor's appointment? How much medication do you usually keep? What company delivers your prescriptions? Do you still know the garage code? I answered every question. Why would I hide anything from my own son? One Saturday afternoon, he sat across from me on the back patio while Melissa watered my flowers. Dad, he said, we finally booked our Europe trip. I smiled. You've always wanted to go. We'll be gone a while. How long? He grinned proudly. 58 days. I raised my eyebrows. That's quite a vacation. Melissa laughed. Once in a lifetime. I'm happy for both of you. Then I asked the question that changed everything. So, who's staying with me? Ryan didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of iced tea. Finally, he shrugged. You'll be okay. I waited. Surely there was more. No one says you'll be okay to a 71-year-old man with heart disease unless they already have a plan. Your cousin, I know, a home health nurse. He shook his head. I'll ask Mrs. Jenkins next door to check on me. You don't need that. I looked at him. What do you mean? You've been doing fine by yourself. I won't really be by myself if you're in another country. Melissa stepped in before Ryan answered. Harold, you'll probably enjoy the peace and quiet. Something about the way she smiled bothered me. It wasn't warm, it wasn't reassuring, it felt rehearsed. I couldn't explain why. I simply felt uncomfortable. Ryan changed the subject. We'll stock your refrigerator before we leave. Okay. I'll refill your prescriptions. Good. I'll make sure all the bills are paid. Thanks. Everything sounded responsible. Everything sounded loving. Yet something deep inside me whispered that things weren't quite right. That night I couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, I walked through my own house checking every door, every window. I wasn't afraid of burglars. I wasn't even sure what I was afraid of, only that a strange heaviness had settled into my chest. The following week, Ryan insisted on organizing my medicine cabinet. Too many bottles, he said. I'll straighten everything out. He also wanted copies of my insurance information, my doctor's phone number, my pharmacy account, even the passwords to my online utility accounts. It'll make things easier if there's an emergency. Again, perfectly reasonable. Or so it seemed. The day before their flight, they arrived carrying groceries and smiling for selfies they'd later post online. Ryan hugged me before leaving. Don't worry about a thing, Dad. Melissa kissed my cheek. We'll bring you something from Italy. I stood on the porch waving as their SUV disappeared down the street. I remember thinking how proud Eleanor would have been. Our boy turned out pretty well. I had no idea that before sunrise the next morning my own son would quietly begin putting into motion a plan that would leave me trapped inside my own home, with almost no chance of surviving until he came back. I woke up the morning after Ryan and Melissa left, feeling strangely optimistic. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually follows a holiday. I made myself a cup of coffee, lined up my morning medications on the kitchen counter, and smiled at the postcard Ryan had promised to send from Paris. Maybe I'd been imagining things. Maybe I'd let my age make me suspicious. I actually felt guilty for doubting my own son. By 9 o'clock, the lights flickered, once, twice, then everything went dark. The refrigerator stopped humming. The microwave display disappeared. I frowned. Well, I muttered, guess the power company picked a bad day. Power outages weren't unusual after summer storms. Except, the sky outside was perfectly clear. I walked to the window. The Jenkinses across the street had lights on. The Johnson family next door was mowing their lawn. Only my house was dark. That was odd. I reached for the landline. Nothing, not even a dial tone. I picked up my cell phone. No service. I walked from room to room, holding it near windows. Still nothing. Finally, one tiny bar appeared. I dialed Ryan, straight to voicemail. I left a message. Hey, buddy, the power's out here. Landline's dead too. Give me a call when you can. I wasn't worried. Not yet. Around lunchtime, I opened the refrigerator. The milk already felt warmer than it should. I decided to eat leftovers before they spoiled. Then I reached for my insulin. It wasn't there. I checked the shelf again, then the drawer. Then every compartment. Nothing. Maybe Ryan had moved it while organizing. I searched every cabinet in the kitchen, every drawer, the medicine cabinet, the bathroom, the bedroom, nothing. My stomach tightened. I opened the plastic organizer where I kept my heart medication. Half the bottles were gone. Not empty. Gone. I sat down. No. I whispered the word to an empty kitchen. Ryan wouldn't. Would he? I immediately pushed the thought away. There had to be another explanation. Maybe he'd taken the old bottles to refill them? Maybe they'd be delivered later that afternoon? Yes, that had to be it. By evening, the refrigerator had become noticeably warm. I ate peanut butter on crackers for dinner. The freezer had already begun melting. Still no phone call, no electricity, no water. I discovered that last problem when I turned on the kitchen faucet. Nothing. I tried the bathroom sink. Nothing. The shower. Nothing. Not even a trickle. I stared at the faucet in disbelief. Power, water, phone, all gone. At exactly the same time, my hands began shaking. I walked to the front door. The deadbolt turned, but the door wouldn't open. I pulled harder. Nothing. I unlocked it again, pulled with both hands. Still nothing. Confused, I walked to the back door. Same thing. Then the garage. The interior door opened. The garage door wouldn't. The emergency release cord had been tied high enough that I couldn't reach it. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I wasn't trapped by accident. I tried every window in the house. Most had secondary security pins. Pins I had never installed. The basement windows had been screwed shut. I stood in the middle of my living room, breathing harder than I should have been. My heart was racing. No, I whispered again. No, Ryan. Surely he hadn't done this. Surely there was some explanation. That night I barely slept. Without electricity, my oxygen concentrator sat silent beside my bed. Thankfully, I still had a portable oxygen cylinder, but I only had enough for emergencies. It wasn't supposed to replace my concentrator for weeks. I turned the flow rate lower than prescribed. Every breath became a calculation. Every hour mattered. The second day was worse. The house became warm. Food spoiled quickly. I threw away meat that had already begun smelling sour. I rationed bottled water. There were only 11 bottles left in the pantry. 11. I counted them twice. I began writing in an old spiral notebook. Day 2. Power still off. Water still off. Can't reach Ryan. Feeling weak. If someone finds this, please tell them I tried. I didn't know why I wrote those words. Maybe because I was a principal for 40 years. Documentation had become second nature. Or maybe because, somewhere inside me, I already knew this wasn't an accident. 3 days later, my blood sugar climbed dangerously. Without insulin, I couldn't control it. My mouth stayed dry. My vision blurred. I slept more than I should. Walking from the bedroom to the kitchen left me winded. Still no one came. I looked out the front window several times a day. Cars passed. Children rode bicycles. Life continued. No one knew I was trapped only 20 feet away. On the 5th day, I finally received one text message. One bar of service appeared for less than 30 seconds. It was from Ryan, a picture. He and Melissa standing beneath the Eiffel Tower, both smiling. The caption read, "Living the dream." No, how are you? No need anything, just living the dream. I typed as fast as my fingers could move. Call me. Emergency. The message never sent. The signal disappeared. I stared at the screen until it went black. For the first time in my life, I cried because of my son. Days blended together. Morning, heat, silence, darkness, weakness. I stopped shaving, stopped changing clothes, stopped pretending someone would arrive that afternoon. Instead, I created routines. 1 bottle of water per day, half a can of soup, 1 piece of bread, 1 flashlight battery every 3 nights. I crossed off each day in my notebook. Day 8, day 11, day 15, day 19. The pages became shakier. So did my handwriting. Sometimes I talked to Eleanor. Her photograph still sat beside my recliner. I miss you. I could really use your advice. I don't understand what's happening. At night, I imagined her answering, not with words, just with that patient smile she'd always worn whenever life became difficult. She had believed people deserved second chances. I wondered whether she'd still believe that now. Sometime around the 4th week, I heard knocking, loud, fast. Hope exploded inside me. I struggled to my feet. "Don't go!" I shouted. "I'm here!" My voice cracked. I shuffled toward the front door as quickly as my swollen legs allowed. Each step felt like climbing stairs carrying bricks. The knocking stopped. I reached the door too late. I heard a vehicle drive away. I pressed my forehead against the wood. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm still here." No one answered. That moment broke something inside me. Until then, I'd believed rescue was coming. After that, I wasn't sure anymore. My notebook entries became shorter. Day 34. Very weak. No insulin. Little water. Can't think clearly. Day 41. Dreamed Eleanor was sitting beside me. Felt peaceful. Day 47. Not afraid anymore. Just tired. By the 56th day, I could barely stand. The portable oxygen cylinder was nearly empty. The air inside the house smelled stale. The refrigerator smelled rotten. Every room felt smaller than the one before. I stopped counting hours. I started wondering whether death would be painful or simply quiet. I lowered myself onto the living room floor because I no longer had the strength to reach my bedroom. The notebook slipped from my hands. I closed my eyes. I remember thinking one final thought. Maybe Ryan will at least have the decency to bury me beside his mother. Then everything faded into darkness. What I didn't know was that someone just outside my house had finally noticed something wasn't right, and that single observation was about to change everything. The first sound I remember wasn't a siren. It wasn't a police officer shouting. It wasn't even my own name. It was the splintering crack of my front door giving way. Then came heavy footsteps. Police. County Sheriff's Office. Is anyone inside? I tried to answer. Nothing came out except a dry rasp. I forced myself to lift one hand from the floor. One of the deputies spotted the movement. Over here, everything became a blur. Someone knelt beside me. Another deputy leaned close enough for me to hear him. Sir, can you hear me? I nodded. Barely. Hang in there. EMS is on the way. I remember wanting to tell him that I wasn't trapped because I'd fallen, that none of this had been an accident, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. The words stayed inside my head. Later I learned how they had found me. It wasn't some dramatic coincidence. It was ordinary people paying attention. My retired mail carrier, Linda Foster, still volunteered to cover neighborhood routes whenever the regular carrier was sick. Linda had delivered mail to my house for nearly 25 years before retiring. She knew my routines better than most of my relatives. She knew I always collected my mail before noon. She knew I never let newspapers pile up. She knew Eleanor had trained me to keep the front porch spotless. When she drove past my house that morning, something immediately bothered her. The mailbox was overflowing. Flyers covered the porch. Packages sat untouched. The lawn looked neglected. She parked her car and knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Then she noticed something else. A faint smell, not strong enough to identify, just enough to make her uneasy. Instead of driving away, she crossed the street to Mrs. Jenkins' house. Mrs. Jenkins hadn't seen me in weeks. She assumed I was staying with Ryan. Linda frowned. Harold never goes anywhere without telling me first. Together they called the sheriff's office for a welfare check. That simple decision saved my life. When the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance, I drifted in and out of consciousness. I remember bright sunlight hurting my eyes. I remember someone placing an oxygen mask over my face. I remember hearing one paramedic quietly say, "Blood sugar's dangerously high." Another answered, "He's severely dehydrated." Then someone asked, "How long has he been like this?" No one knew. I woke up 2 days later in the intensive care unit. Everything around me beeped. Machines, monitors, IV pumps. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. Then I saw Dr. Patel. He'd been my cardiologist for almost 8 years. He smiled when he realized I was awake. "Welcome back, Harold." My voice sounded weak. "How long?" "You've been here 2 days." I swallowed painfully. "My house. It's secure." "My son." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted the blanket. "You need to focus on recovering." I looked him straight in the eye. "Did I almost die?" Doctors usually avoid answering questions like that. Dr. Patel didn't. "Yes." He paused. "Another day." He stopped, then quietly finished. "Possibly even less." I closed my eyes. Not because I wanted to sleep, because I suddenly understood how close I'd come. Over the next several days, specialists came and went. A nutritionist, a physical therapist, a social worker. Then 2 people introduced themselves together. "I'm Detective Michael Torres." The woman beside him extended her hand. "Angela Brooks, Adult Protective Services." I had heard of APS before, mostly through newspaper stories involving elder neglect. I never imagined they would be sitting beside my own hospital bed. Angela spoke gently. "Mr. Collins, we're not here to pressure you. We simply need to understand what happened." I looked out of the hospital window for a long moment. The truth felt heavier than any illness I'd ever carried. Finally, I nodded. I'll tell you everything. And I did. From the beginning. Ryan offering to manage my finances, taking over my utility accounts, organizing my medications, the Europe trip, the missing insulin, the locked doors, the dead phones, everything. Neither investigator interrupted. They simply listened. Occasionally, Detective Torres wrote notes. Angela watched my face more than her notebook. When I finished, the room stayed quiet. Finally, Torres asked, "Did your son ever threaten you?" "No." "Did he ever ask you to die?" "No." Angela leaned forward. "Mr. Collins, did he ever make you feel like you were a burden?" That question hurt more than all the others. I thought about every conversation Ryan and I had shared during the previous year. The jokes about assisted living, the comments about how expensive medications had become, the sighs whenever I needed help carrying groceries. I looked back at her. Yes. She slowly closed her notebook. 3 days later, my attorney David Morrison walked into my hospital room carrying a leather briefcase. David had handled Eleanor's estate years earlier. He'd become more of a friend than a lawyer. When he saw me sitting up in bed, relief washed across his face. "You scared us." "I scared myself." He laughed softly. Then his expression became serious. "I've reviewed some preliminary information." "What information?" He pulled out several photocopies. "Harold, did Ryan ask you to sign documents recently?" I frowned. "Maybe." "What kind?" "I don't remember." He said they were banking forms. David placed one sheet on my bedside table. "Do you recognize this signature?" I looked down. It was mine, without question. "What is it?" "A limited power of attorney." My stomach tightened. "I never agreed to that." "You signed it." "I didn't read it." David nodded sadly. "I was afraid you'd say that." He handed me another document, then another. Authorization to access utility accounts, permission to redirect financial correspondence, a change of contact information with my pharmacy, one after another. Each signature belonged to me. Each decision had benefited Ryan, not me. I felt sick. "I trusted him." David's voice remained calm. "I know. I thought they were routine forms." "I know. I didn't even put my glasses on." "I know." He wasn't judging me. That somehow made it worse. Later that afternoon, Detective Torres returned. David stayed in the room. The detective looked at both of us before speaking. "We've confirmed something." "What?" "The electric company didn't disconnect your service because of a storm." "I figured that. They disconnected it because someone requested termination." I stared at him. "Termination?" He nodded. "The request came through your online account." "My account. Using your password." I already knew what he was about to say. "I didn't do it." "We know." Silence filled the room. Then Torres added something that made every hair on my arm stand up. "The water company received a similar request. So did the landline provider." I couldn't breathe for a moment. David slowly removed his glasses. The detective continued. "And all three requests were submitted within 43 minutes. The night before your son flew to Europe." No one spoke. Finally, David broke the silence. "This isn't simple neglect anymore." He looked directly at me. "Harold, I believe someone carefully planned every step." I felt tears filling my eyes. Not because I was afraid, because for the first time, I realized the worst part wasn't what had happened to me. It was accepting that the person investigators were describing was my own son. For the first week after Detective Torres told me the utility shutoffs had been requested online, I kept trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Identity theft, a computer error, a misunderstanding, anything but the truth. When you spent 45 years loving someone, your heart doesn't suddenly accept that they're capable of the unthinkable. Your mind fights it, even when the evidence keeps winning. By the second week, I had been moved out of the intensive care unit and into a regular hospital room. I was walking again, though only short distances, with a physical therapist. Every step reminded me how weak I'd become. Dr. Patel told me my kidneys had been damaged by dehydration. Thankfully, the damage wasn't permanent. "It'll take time," he said. "Don't rush recovery." "I've got nowhere to rush to." He smiled politely, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. Doctors see victims every day. They don't often see victims betrayed by their own children. Detective Torres returned almost every afternoon. He never rushed our conversations. He understood something many investigators probably didn't. This wasn't just a criminal case. It was the slow collapse of everything I'd believed about my own family. One afternoon, he laid several folders across the small hospital table. "We've executed search warrants." I looked at the folders. "So, what did you find?" He opened the first one. "Your online banking records." He slid several printed pages toward me. There were transfers I didn't recognize. Nothing enormous. $500, $800, $1,200, spread across nearly 18 months, always described as reimbursements, household expenses, medical supplies, emergency purchases. I frowned. I never approved these. "We know." "How much?" He looked down at his notes. "So far, just over $48,000. I felt my stomach twist. Ryan hadn't stolen everything at once. He'd taken small amounts, quietly, patiently, like someone who understood that tiny losses were harder to notice than one large one. The second folder contained utility records. Every account had been transferred into Ryan's online profile months earlier. Every password changed. Every security question updated. The detective pointed to one page. "See this?" It showed the exact timestamp when my electricity had been disconnected. 10:43 p.m., the night before Ryan's flight. Another page, water service. 11:08 p.m., another, landline. 11:21 p.m. Everything happened within 40 minutes. Nothing about it looked accidental. The third folder disturbed me even more. It contained emails. Ryan had contacted a real estate agent. The subject line read, "Preparing property evaluation." The date was nearly 3 weeks before leaving for Europe. The message itself was short. "I'd like to discuss listing my father's home when the timing is appropriate." The realtor had replied professionally. "Is your father aware of the sale?" Ryan answered. "He won't need the house much longer." I stopped reading. My hands started shaking. Detective Torres quietly slid the papers away. "You don't have to finish today." "I want to." "No, Harold." His voice was gentle. "You think you do, but you don't." For the first time since entering the hospital, I listened. David Morrison visited later that afternoon. He had another stack of documents. "I'm afraid there's more." I almost laughed. "There always is." He nodded. "Ryan also redirected your financial statements, so I wouldn't notice the missing money." "Exactly. He changed my pharmacy contact information too, didn't he?" David looked surprised. "Yes. That's how he stopped my prescription deliveries." "I'm afraid so." The room fell silent. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "David, if I had died," he answered before I finished, "he would have inherited nearly everything." The words landed with terrible simplicity. Not anger, not revenge, just arithmetic. A paid-off home, retirement savings, investments Eleanor and I had spent 40 years building. Everything. That evening I couldn't sleep. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and remembered a completely different Ryan, a skinny 8-year-old running toward me after hitting his first home run. "Dad, did you see it?" "I sure did." A nervous 16-year-old asking me for advice before his driver's test. A college graduate hugging me after commencement. "You believed in me." "I always will." Those memories weren't fake. They had happened, which made the present even harder to understand. Where had that little boy gone? At what point had gratitude become entitlement? At what point had love become calculation? Parents spend years wondering whether they made the right decisions. Lying awake in that hospital bed, I replayed every major moment of Ryan's childhood. Should I have been stricter? Did I rescue him too often? Did I mistake generosity for good parenting? I had no answers, only questions. 3 days later, Detective Torres returned with news that chilled me. "We recovered internet search history." I looked up. "From Ryan's laptop." He hesitated. "I'm going to read you a few searches." I nodded. "How long before utilities disconnect after cancellation?" Another page. "Can insulin go bad without refrigeration?" Another. "Average response time for welfare checks." He paused. then quietly continued, "How long before someone living alone is discovered after death?" The room became painfully still. I closed my eyes. My chest tightened, not because I was having another heart problem, because each sentence erased another excuse I'd tried to make for my son. Then Detective Torres surprised me. "There's something else." "What?" "We found messages between Ryan and Melissa." He wasn't supposed to show me everything. He knew that. But he also knew I deserved the truth. He opened his notebook. "They're difficult to hear. I've already survived the hardest part." He read one message. "Melissa. Do you think he'll manage Ryan? Doesn't matter. Another. Melissa. What if someone checks on him, Ryan? Nobody visits him." Then the final message, 3 days after arriving in Paris. Melissa had sent a photograph of the Eiffel Tower. Ryan replied, "By the time we get home, everything should already be settled." I stared out the window. The words echoed in my head. Everything should already be settled. Not hopefully, not maybe, already. A few mornings later, I was finally discharged. I wasn't strong enough to return home yet. David had arranged for me to stay temporarily in a rehabilitation center while my house was processed as evidence. As we walked toward the elevator, Detective Torres stopped beside me. "One more thing." "Yes." "Ryan flies back next Tuesday." I nodded. "I know. Don't call him." "I wasn't planning to." "Don't text him." "I won't. We prefer he believes nothing has changed." I looked at him. "You want him to walk back into the house?" He gave a small nod. "Exactly." I understood immediately. If Ryan truly believed I had died alone exactly as he'd planned, he would walk through that front door expecting to inherit a future. Instead, he was about to walk into the consequences of his choices. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized justice didn't need anger. It only needed the truth to be waiting patiently inside my living room. The morning Ryan's flight landed, I woke before sunrise. Not because I had slept well, I hadn't. Sleep came in short stretches these days, interrupted by memories of darkness, empty pill bottles, and the sound of water that never came from my kitchen faucet. I sat on the edge of the bed in the rehabilitation center and looked out the window. The sky over Columbus was just beginning to turn pale blue. A nurse knocked softly before entering. "Big day." I managed a faint smile. "You could say that." She adjusted my blood pressure cuff and looked at me with quiet concern. "You don't have to do anything today that you're not comfortable with." "I know." "Your attorney said the investigators have everything under control." "They do." She hesitated. "Are you afraid to see your son?" I thought about that question for a long moment. "No." "What are you feeling?" I looked back toward the window. "I think I'm grieving. Not for my health, not for my house, for the son I thought I had." By mid-morning, David Morrison picked me up. I was still walking with a cane. My strength had improved, but 58 days without proper medication had left their mark. The detective had insisted I didn't need to be present. I could have stayed away. I could have watched everything later through reports and photographs, but I knew I had to be there. Not for revenge, for closure. As we drove toward my neighborhood, I recognized familiar streets. The coffee shop where Eleanor and I had spent Saturday mornings. The little league field where Ryan had hit that first home run. The hardware store where we'd bought paint when he was 14 and wanted to repaint his bedroom. Every corner held a memory. Some of them beautiful, some of them almost unbearable. When we reached my house, several unmarked county vehicles were already parked nearby. Detective Torres met us in the driveway. He shook my hand gently. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous." "That's understandable." He pointed toward the house. "We've kept everything exactly as it was." I nodded. Nothing inside had been staged, nothing exaggerated. The investigators wanted Ryan to walk into the same home he had left. The same furniture, the same family photographs, the same living room. Only one thing would be different. I was still alive. Inside, the atmosphere was strangely peaceful. Angela Brooks from Adult Protective Services sat quietly at the dining table reviewing paperwork. Another detective stood near the hallway. David took a seat beside me. No one spoke very much. There was no excitement, no celebration. Justice, I realized, rarely looks dramatic in real life. It mostly looks like patient people waiting for facts to catch up with lies. Hours passed. Someone brought sandwiches. I barely touched mine. Around 4 o'clock, Detective Torres glanced at his phone. They just landed. Nobody moved. At 5:15, another message arrived. They've picked up their luggage. 5:40. They're leaving the airport. The room became even quieter. At 6:22, Torres looked toward the front window. They're here. I heard the SUV before I saw it. Its engine stopped in the driveway. Car doors slammed. Laughter. Melissa's voice drifted through the open window. I can't wait to sleep in our own bed. Ryan chuckled. I can't wait to unpack. The sound of rolling suitcases across the walkway echoed through the silent house. Then came the familiar rattle of keys. The front door unlocked. The handle turned. The door slowly opened. Ryan stepped inside wearing a navy polo shirt and sunglasses pushed onto his head. Melissa followed behind him carrying shopping bags with European logos. He didn't notice us immediately. He smiled as he looked around the entryway. Well, Dad, we're home. Then he walked into the living room and stopped. His suitcase tipped sideways and crashed onto the hardwood floor. The smile disappeared from his face. For several seconds, he simply stared. His eyes moved from Detective Torres to Angela to David and finally to me. I was sitting in my recliner, the same chair where I'd spent countless evenings watching baseball with Eleanor, the same chair where I'd believed I was going to die. Ryan's lips parted. Dad. It barely sounded like a word. It sounded like fear. Melissa gasped. Her shopping bag slipped from her hands. Glass bottles clinked loudly as they hit the floor. No, she whispered. No. Ryan took one slow step toward me. His face had gone completely pale. He couldn't finish. His knees actually seemed to weaken beneath him. Detective Torres stood. Ryan Collins. Ryan looked at him without answering. Ryan Collins. Yes. I'm Detective Michael Torres with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. He calmly removed a folded document from a folder. We have search warrants for several electronic devices and financial records. Ryan blinked. I don't understand. You will. Melissa finally found her voice. There has to be some mistake. Angela Brooks stood next. I'm Angela Brooks with Adult Protective Services. We've been investigating allegations involving the neglect and endangerment of Mr. Harold Collins. Melissa immediately looked at Ryan. Not at me, at Ryan. It was only for a second, but it told me something important. She already knew. Ryan turned back toward me. Dad, I can explain. I looked at him quietly. For 58 days, my voice remained calm. I waited to hear those words. He swallowed hard. I thought. You thought what? Silence. You thought I was dead. His shoulders collapsed. No, but he couldn't look me in the eye when he said it. That answer told me everything. Detective Torres stepped forward. We've recovered utility records, financial records, electronic communications, internet searches, and witness statements. Ryan stared blankly. The detective continued in the same calm voice. You have the right to remain silent. Melissa burst into tears. I told you this was a bad idea. Ryan turned toward her. Stop talking. You said nobody would know. The words escaped before she realized what she'd admitted. The room became perfectly still. Even Melissa covered her mouth. Too late. David quietly wrote something in his notebook. Angela lowered her eyes. Detective Torres simply nodded toward another deputy. Every sentence mattered. Every spontaneous word mattered. As the deputies collected phones, laptops, and travel documents, Ryan looked at me again. His eyes filled with tears. Dad, I'm sorry. I believed he was frightened. I wasn't sure he was sorry. There is a difference. One comes from conscience. The other comes from consequences. He took another hesitant step. Please. I slowly shook my head. I loved you your entire life. My voice never rose. I would have given you anything you asked for. His shoulders began trembling. So why didn't you ask? He couldn't answer. Neither could I. Because there was no answer that could repair what had been broken. The deputies escorted Ryan and Melissa toward the front door. Neighbors had quietly gathered outside. Not many, just enough to notice. No one shouted. No one applauded. No one celebrated. They simply watched. Sometimes the loudest judgment comes from complete silence. As Ryan reached the porch, he looked back one final time. Our eyes met. He whispered one word. Dad. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, because some moments are too heavy for words. And in that moment, I realized the greatest revenge had never been watching my son lose everything. It was surviving long enough to let the truth speak for itself. People often assume that the day justice arrives is the day everything starts feeling better. It isn't. Justice can stop someone from hurting you again. It can't erase what already happened. The weeks after Ryan's arrest were some of the strangest of my life. My body continued healing. My heart struggled to keep up. The criminal case moved forward slowly, just as my attorney had predicted. David prepared me for that. Television makes these things look fast, he said one afternoon over coffee. In real life, justice is patient. He was right. Investigators spent months reviewing financial records, digital evidence utility company logs, pharmacy records, and security footage. The evidence painted a picture far more complete than anything I could have described myself. It wasn't one terrible decision. It was dozens. Small choices, calculated choices, each one moving in the same direction, away from compassion, toward greed. Ryan eventually accepted responsibility rather than forcing everyone through a lengthy trial. The judge spoke firmly during sentencing. I've handled many financial crimes, she said. I've handled cases involving elder neglect. What makes this case especially disturbing is that the victim trusted the defendant completely. Those words stayed with me. Trusted. That had always been the real crime. Not simply taking money, not shutting off utilities, not hiding medication, destroying trust. Melissa's life unraveled as well. She eventually admitted she had ignored warning signs she should never have ignored. She claimed she hadn't believed I would actually die. I don't know if that was true. Perhaps she had convinced herself everything would somehow work out. Human beings have an incredible ability to ignore uncomfortable truths when doing so benefits them. She later divorced Ryan. I didn't celebrate that either. Broken families rarely produce winners, only different kinds of loss. As for me, I made a decision that surprised many people. I sold the old house. Not because I couldn't afford to keep it, because I no longer wanted to live inside the place where I'd spent nearly 2 months wondering if anyone would ever find me. Some memories deserve honoring, others deserve leaving behind. I found a smaller one-story home in a nearby neighborhood. No stairs, friendly neighbors, a little front porch where I could drink coffee in the mornings. It wasn't the house Eleanor and I had built our lives in. But peace isn't always tied to a building. Sometimes it's tied to finally feeling safe again. One of the first people to visit me there was Linda Foster, the retired mail carrier. She arrived carrying a homemade apple pie. I still think yours was better, she joked. I laughed harder than I had in months. If that's true, I said Eleanor deserves the credit. We sat on the porch talking until sunset. She never once acted like she had rescued me. She simply said something I'll never forget. Neighbors aren't supposed to replace family. But sometimes we're exactly who family needs. She was right. After everything that happened, I realized family isn't defined only by blood. It's defined by the people who show up when your life depends on it. A few months later, Angela Brooks from Adult Protective Services invited me to speak at a community seminar on elder abuse awareness. My first instinct was to decline. I'm not much of a public speaker anymore. She smiled. You were a high school principal for 40 years. You've spoken to thousands of people. That's different. Why? Teenagers don't scare me, she laughed. Neither do older adults. So I agreed. The first seminar drew about 30 people. The second nearly 70. By the end of the year, I had spoken at churches, libraries, veterans organizations, retirement communities, and civic clubs across Central Ohio. I never shared my story to embarrass Ryan. I shared it because every audience included someone quietly saying afterward, I think something similar is happening to my father. Or, my sister controls all of mom's money. Or, I didn't know those were warning signs. If my experience helped even one family step in before tragedy, then surviving had a purpose beyond my own life. Nearly a year after everything happened, David called me. I received a letter. From who? You already know. Ryan. I wasn't sure I wanted to read it. David didn't pressure me. I'll leave it with you. The envelope sat unopened on my kitchen table for almost 3 days. Finally, I opened it. The handwriting looked older somehow, less confident. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame Melissa. He didn't blame stress. He simply wrote, Dad. Every day I think about opening that front door and seeing you alive. I thought I wanted your money. What I really lost was the right to call myself your son. I'm sorry for every choice I made. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed. I folded the letter carefully. Then I cried. Not because the pain disappeared, because regret had finally reached the person who needed to feel it. Several weeks later, I visited him. The correctional facility was quiet. The visiting room was smaller than I expected. Ryan walked in looking thinner, older. He stopped a few feet away. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry. This time it sounded different. Not frightened, not desperate, simply honest. I looked at him for a long time. I believe you. His eyes filled with tears. But believing you, I continued, doesn't erase what happened. I know. I can't pretend those 58 days never existed. I know. I may never fully trust you again. I understand. I reached across the table, not to erase the past, simply to acknowledge that hatred didn't deserve the final word in either of our lives. He took my hand and quietly cried. So did I. Forgiveness, I discovered, isn't forgetting. It's deciding that someone else's worst decision won't become the final chapter of your own life. Our relationship would never be what it once was. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but scars also remind us that healing is possible. Today, when I lock my front door each evening, I still check it twice. Old habits linger. So do difficult memories. But I also look across the street at neighbors who wave. I answer phone calls from friends who genuinely care. I volunteer. I laugh again. I wake each morning grateful for another day that almost never came. If this story leaves you with one thought, let it be this: growing older should never mean surrendering your dignity, your independence, or your voice. Trust the people you love, but don't stop protecting yourself. Ask questions. Stay connected to friends and neighbors. And if something feels wrong, speak up before silence becomes dangerous. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of someone you love, or encouraged you to check on an aging parent, neighbor, or friend, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, justice, forgiveness, and hope, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined us again. Thank you for spending this time with me.